The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace as King Alexander paced nervously in his private study. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he held the letter that had arrived just hours before. The royal seal bore the mark of the neighboring kingdom of Storie, and its contents would change everything he had worked to build over the past 30 years. Queen Isabella, his second wife of 15 years, entered the room without knocking. Her emerald silk dress rustled against the doorframe as she moved with the calculated grace that had first caught his attention at a diplomatic gathering decades ago. But now, that same elegance felt cold and calculating to Alexander. "You summoned me, my lord?" Isabella's voice carried the faint accent of her homeland, Meridia, a small but wealthy nation known for its strategic ports and political cunning. Alexander turned to face her, his steel-gray eyes reflecting years of accumulated doubt and suspicion. "The letter from King Marcus has arrived. He's requesting an audience about the trade agreement violations." Isabella's perfectly composed expression didn't waver, but Alexander noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. "I assume you'll meet with him as planned?" "The violations he speaks of, they involve the secret shipments through Meridian ports, shipments that were arranged without my knowledge or approval." Alexander's voice grew harder with each word. "Shipments that have been making certain people very wealthy while undermining our kingdom's official policies." For the first time in years, Isabella's mask slipped ever so slightly. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Isabella." Alexander walked to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "I've had investigators looking into our kingdom's finances for months. Every transaction, every trade deal, every diplomatic arrangement made in the last 5 years." The queen's face paled beneath her carefully applied makeup. She had always prided herself on being steps ahead of everyone around her, including her husband, but the folder in his hand suggested that perhaps she had underestimated the old king's determination. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, though her voice lacked its usual confident tone. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts." Alexander opened the folder and began reading. "Unauthorized weapons shipments to rebel groups in 3 neighboring kingdoms. Secret agreements with Meridian merchants that bypass our tax systems. And, most damaging of all, classified military information sold to foreign powers." Isabella's hands clenched at her sides. "You have no proof that I was involved in any of these activities, don't I?" Alexander pulled out a series of photographs. "These were taken at the port of Silvermere. That's you, meeting with Captain Rodriguez of the merchant vessel Knight's Edge, the same ship that's been flagged by 4 different kingdoms for smuggling." The queen moved closer to examine the photographs, her mind racing to find an explanation that would satisfy her husband's growing suspicions. But the evidence was damning, and she knew it. "Even if I was there, it doesn't prove anything illegal," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Perhaps not, but this might." Alexander produced a letter written in Isabella's own handwriting. "Your correspondence with Lord Blackwood of Meridia discussing the special arrangements for bypassing our kingdom's trade sanctions." Isabella's carefully constructed world began to crumble around her. For 5 years, she had been building a secret network of alliances and financial arrangements that would secure her position and wealth, regardless of what happened to Valdoria. She had married Alexander for power and status, but she had always planned for the day when she might need to abandon the kingdom altogether. "Alexander, you must understand," she began, but he held up his hand to silence her. "I understand perfectly. You've been using your position as queen to build your own empire, regardless of the cost to this kingdom and its people." His voice grew cold and distant. "The question now is what I'm going to do about it." Isabella straightened her shoulders, drawing on years of training in diplomatic negotiation. "Whatever you think you've discovered, we can work through this together. I am still your wife, still the queen of this realm. Are you?" Alexander's question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. "Because, according to the law investigators I consulted, your marriage to me may not be legal." The color drained completely from Isabella's face. "What do you mean?" "Your first marriage, to Count Ferdinand of Meridia. The one you claimed was annulled before you married me." Alexander's eyes never left her face. "It seems the annulment papers were forged. Ferdinand is still alive, still legally your husband according to Meridian law. Isabella's legs felt weak, and she gripped the back of a chair for support. That's impossible. Ferdinand died in a hunting accident. Ferdinand has been living quietly on his estate in the Meridian countryside for the past 20 years, very much alive, very much still married to you, according to the legal documents I've obtained. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the ancient clock on Alexander's desk. Isabella's mind raced through possibilities, escape routes, and potential allies who might help her salvage the situation. But with each passing second, she realized how thoroughly she had been outmaneuvered. The coronation ceremony, our wedding, your title as queen, all of it based on falsified documents, Alexander continued, which means you've been committing fraud on multiple levels for the past 15 years. Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. What do you want from me? What I want is irrelevant now. What's going to happen is this. You have until sunset tomorrow to leave this palace and this kingdom, permanently. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Alexander's voice carried the full weight of royal authority. The alternative is a public trial for treason, fraud, and conspiracy against the crown. I don't think you want that kind of attention. Isabella's mind immediately went to the hidden accounts she had established in Meridian banks, the properties she had secretly purchased, and the network of allies who owed her favors. She had always planned for this possibility, but she had expected more time to execute her escape strategy gracefully. My belongings, my personal effects. You may take what you brought with you when you came here 15 years ago. Nothing more. Everything else belongs to the crown. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the gardens, where they had once walked together in happier times. I trusted you, Isabella. I believed in you, defended you against those who said you were too ambitious, too calculating. Alexander, please. Isabella's voice broke slightly, and for a moment, the calculating queen disappeared, replaced by a woman facing the loss of everything she had worked to achieve. The decision is final, he said without turning around. Guards will escort you to your chambers to pack your personal belongings. You'll leave at first light tomorrow. Isabella stood frozen for several moments, processing the complete destruction of her carefully laid plans. Then, slowly, her composure returned. If she was going to fall, she would fall with dignity. Very well, she said, her voice steady once again. But this isn't over. Alexander, you may think you've won, but you have no idea what forces you're setting in motion. Are you threatening me? Alexander turned to face her, his expression dangerous. I'm simply stating a fact. My connections, my alliances, they extend far beyond this kingdom. Removing me may solve your immediate problem, but it will create much larger ones. Before Alexander could respond, Isabella swept from the room, her head held high despite the disaster that had just befallen her. But as she walked through the corridors, she had considered her own for 15 years. Her mind was already working on new plans, new strategies, new ways to regain what she had lost. Prince William, Alexander's son from his first marriage, stood in the castle's ancient armory when the urgent message reached him. At 28, he had spent the last 10 years serving in the kingdom's military, deliberately staying away from the political intrigue that seemed to surround his stepmother. His hands were examining a ceremonial sword when Captain Morris burst through the heavy oak doors. Your Highness, the king requests your immediate presence in the throne room, Captain Morris announced, slightly out of breath from his hurried journey through the castle's winding corridors. William set down the sword and studied the captain's expression. In all his years of service, he had never seen the usually composed military leader look so agitated. What's happened, Captain? I'm not entirely certain, sir, but there's been significant activity in the palace since dawn. Multiple meetings, sealed documents being prepared, and... Captain Morris hesitated before continuing. The Queen's personal guard has been dismissed from duty. He had long suspected that something was amiss with Isabella's activities, though he had never been able to prove anything concrete. As the rightful heir to the throne, he had watched carefully as his stepmother gradually accumulated power and influence that extended far beyond what was appropriate for her position. The walk to the throne room felt longer than usual. William passed several servants who quickly averted their eyes, their nervous behavior confirming that something significant was happening within the palace walls. The ancient stone corridors seemed to echo with an unusual tension, as if the very building was holding its breath in anticipation. King Alexander sat alone on the throne, looking older than William had ever seen him. The ornate chair that had been occupied by rulers of Valdoria for 3 centuries seemed to dwarf his father's frame, emphasizing the weight of the responsibilities he carried. "Father," William said, bowing formally as protocol required. Even in private meetings. "William," Alexander's voice carried exhaustion and disappointment in equal measure. "I need you to understand what's about to happen, and why it's necessary." Without preamble, Alexander began explaining the evidence he had uncovered about Isabella's activities. He detailed the secret trade agreements, the weapons smuggling, the falsified marriage documents, and the network of corruption that had been operating under his nose for years. William listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "How long have you known about this?" William asked when his father finished. "I've had suspicions for months, but concrete evidence for only the past few weeks. I wanted to be absolutely certain before taking action." Alexander stood from the throne and walked to the tall windows that overlooked the kingdom's capital city. "Your stepmother has been more cunning than I gave her credit for." William joined his father at the window, looking out at the bustling streets below, where citizens went about their daily lives, unaware of the crisis unfolding in the palace above them. "What's your plan?" "Permanently." Alexander's voice was firm, but William could hear the underlying pain of a man who had been betrayed by someone he trusted. "But her departure is only the beginning. We need to identify and neutralize her entire network before they can retaliate." "You're expecting retaliation?" William asked, though the question was largely rhetorical. Anyone capable of the level of deception Isabella had demonstrated would certainly have contingency plans. "I'm counting on it, which is why I need you to take charge of our security operations immediately." Alexander turned to face his son directly. "Your military experience, your knowledge of the kingdom's defenses, and most importantly, your distance from Isabella's influence make you the only person I can trust completely with this responsibility." William nodded slowly, understanding the magnitude of what his father was asking. "What about the nobility?" "Many of them have benefited from Isabella's innocence. They won't simply accept her removal without consequences. That's exactly what I'm concerned about. Lord Blackwood of Meridia, Duke Harrison of the northern provinces, even some of our own court officials may have been compromised." Alexander pulled out another folder from beside the throne. "These are the names of everyone who has had significant financial or political dealings with Isabella over the past 5 years. We need to investigate each one carefully." William examined the list, recognizing many familiar names. Some were surprising, others confirmed suspicions he had harbored for years. "Some of these people have access to critical state secrets, Father. If they've been compromised, then we're looking at a much larger problem than simple corruption," Alexander finished. "We could be dealing with a systematic infiltration designed to destabilize our entire government." Both men understood that Isabella's removal was not the end of their problems, but potentially the beginning of a much more dangerous phase. Her network of allies and co-conspirators would not simply fade away with her departure. "I'll need access to all intelligence reports from the past 2 years, William said, his military training taking over as he began to assess the situation strategically. "We need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with before we make any public announcements. I've already ordered all relevant documents to be transferred to the secure vault in the East Tower. You'll have complete access." Alexander paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "There's something else, William, something that may complicate our response." William waited, though he suspected he already knew what his father was about to reveal. "The marriage certificate issue means that Isabella was never legally the queen, which raises questions about the legitimacy of every official action she's taken, every document she's signed, every diplomatic agreement she's negotiated on behalf of the kingdom." The full magnitude of the crisis began to dawn on William. Our allies, our trade partners, our military agreements, any of them that involved Isabella's official participation could be challenged or invalidated. Exactly. We need to conduct a complete review of our international relationships and be prepared to renegotiate critical agreements. Alexander returned to the throne, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. It's going to take months, possibly years, to fully understand and address the damage that's been done. William began pacing, his mind working through the various scenarios they might face. What about the Treasury? If Isabella's been involved in financial manipulation, I've ordered a complete audit, but preliminary reports suggest significant discrepancies. Money that should have been in our royal accounts appears to have been diverted through various shell companies and foreign banks. Alexander's expression grew grim. We may be looking at a situation where our kingdom's financial stability has been compromised. A knock at the throne room's massive doors interrupted their conversation. Captain Morris entered and approached the throne with obvious reluctance. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's been a development. Captain Morris glanced nervously between the king and prince. Queen Isabella has requested a private audience. She claims to have information that could affect the kingdom's security. Alexander and William exchanged glances. They both understood that Isabella was not the type to surrender without attempting to negotiate or manipulate the situation to her advantage. What kind of information? Alexander asked. She wouldn't elaborate, Your Majesty, but she insisted that it concerned threats from external enemies that only she was aware of. Captain Morris shifted uncomfortably. She said that removing her from the kingdom without this knowledge could put Valdoria in immediate danger. William's expression hardened. It's manipulation, Father. She's trying to make herself indispensable by claiming to possess critical information. Possibly, Alexander agreed, but we can't ignore the possibility that she does know something we need to understand. Her network of contacts extends throughout the region. She might have intelligence about genuine threats. Or she might be attempting to buy time to execute whatever escape plan she's developed, William countered. Every moment we delay gives her more opportunities to communicate with her allies. Alexander stood and walked to the window again, weighing the risks of both options. The late afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the palace grounds, and he could see increased activity among the guards as word of the crisis spread through the ranks. We'll meet with her, he decided finally, but under controlled conditions, with witnesses and with clear limitations on what she can discuss. He turned back to Captain Morris. Arrange for the meeting to take place in the formal audience chamber in 1 hour. Full security protocols, and make sure Prince William and yourself are present throughout the conversation. Yes, Your Majesty, Captain Morris replied, bowing before departing to make the arrangements. When they were alone again, William approached his father with concern evident in his expression. Are you certain this is wise? Giving her another opportunity to manipulate the situation? No, I'm not certain at all, Alexander admitted. But if there are genuine external threats that we're unaware of, we need that information. And if she's simply trying to manipulate us, he paused, his expression growing cold and determined. Then we'll deal with that as well. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, both men prepared for what could be either a final negotiation or the opening move in a much more complex and dangerous game. The fate of the kingdom might well depend on their ability to distinguish between genuine intelligence and calculated deception. The formal audience chamber had not hosted such tension in decades. Isabella entered with her head held high, flanked by 2 royal guards who maintained respectful but vigilant positions beside her. She had changed from her morning silk dress into a more austere dark blue gown that somehow managed to make her appear both regal and appropriately somber for the circumstances. King Alexander sat on his throne with Prince William standing to his right and Captain Morris positioned near the chamber's main entrance. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall, stained-glass windows created an almost ethereal atmosphere, but the beauty of the setting could not disguise the underlying hostility that filled the room. You requested this audience, Isabella, Alexander began, using her name rather than her title. A deliberate slight that did not go unnoticed. What information do you claim to possess that could affect our kingdom's security? Isabella stepped forward, maintaining the perfect posture that had been drilled into her during years of royal protocol training. Before I share what I know, I need your assurance that you'll consider the full implications of my departure from Valdoria. You're in no position to make demands, William interjected, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to military command. If you have genuine information about threats to this kingdom, your duty requires you to share it regardless of your personal circumstances. Isabella's gaze shifted to William, and for the first time since entering the chamber, her composed mask slipped slightly. She had always underestimated Alexander's son, viewing him as a simple soldier who preferred battlefields to political maneuvering. But the steely determination in his eyes suggested that perhaps she had misjudged his capabilities. "Very well," she said, turning back to Alexander. 3 weeks ago, I received intelligence through my contacts in the Meridian Trade Network. King Marcus of Asteria has been building a coalition with the northern kingdoms, specifically targeting Valdoria for territorial expansion. Alexander leaned forward on his throne. What kind of coalition? Military and economic. The northern kingdoms have agreed to provide troops and supplies in exchange for portions of Valdoria's territory after the conquest. King Marcus has been using the trade agreement violations as justification to gather support from other regional powers. Isabella paused, letting the implications sink in. The letter you received this morning wasn't about trade disputes. It was reconnaissance, testing your responses, and gathering intelligence about our kingdom's current political stability. William stepped closer to Isabella, his expression skeptical. And how exactly did you come by this information? Through Lord Blackwood's network. He's been feeding information to King Marcus about our kingdom's military capabilities, economic resources, and political vulnerabilities. Isabella's voice remained steady, but there was something in her tone that suggested this revelation was causing her genuine distress. What neither of them realized was that I had established my own intelligence sources within their organization. Captain Morris spoke for the first time since the audience began. You're claiming that you've been conducting counterintelligence operations? I'm claiming that I discovered the threat to Valdoria and have been working to understand its scope and timeline. Isabella moved closer to the throne, her voice becoming more urgent. The coalition plans to begin their military campaign within the next month. They believe that the current political instability in our kingdom, the rumors about our marriage, the questions about my legitimacy as queen, makes this an ideal time to strike. Alexander's expression grew darker as he processed this information. You're suggesting that your own activities, your own deceptions, have made our kingdom vulnerable to attack? I'm stating a fact. Isabella replied bluntly. My actions have been discovered and will become public knowledge. That disclosure will be seen by our enemies as a sign of weakness, an opportunity to exploit our internal divisions. William began pacing behind his father's throne, his military mind analyzing the strategic implications. If what you're saying is true, then your departure from the kingdom will be interpreted as confirmation of our political instability. Exactly. Isabella's voice carried a note of triumph, as if she had successfully made a crucial point, which is why I'm proposing an alternative arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Alexander asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected he wouldn't approve of her suggestion. Allow me to remain in the kingdom, officially stripped of my title and authority, but present as a symbol of continuity. Publicly acknowledge the marriage irregularities, but frame them as technical issues that don't affect the fundamental stability of the monarchy. Isabella's words came more quickly now, as if she was afraid of being interrupted before making her complete argument. Give the appearance of internal unity while we deal with the external threats. The chamber fell silent except for the distant sounds of palace activity filtering through the thick stone walls. Alexander stared at Isabella for several long moments, while William continued his pacing and Captain Morris shifted uncomfortably near the entrance. You're asking me to perpetuate the deception that has already compromised our kingdom's integrity, Alexander said finally. I'm asking you to prioritize the kingdom's survival over your personal feelings of betrayal, Isabella countered. Your pride, your sense of justice, your desire for revenge, none of that matters if Valdoria falls to foreign invaders. William stopped pacing and turned to face Isabella directly. And what guarantee do we have that you won't use this arrangement to continue your previous activities? What's to stop you from rebuilding your network of corruption while we're focused on external threats? Because my network has already been exposed and dismantled. Lord Blackwood and his associates will be watching me as carefully as you are, waiting for any sign that I'm attempting to regain power or influence. Isabella's voice carried a note of bitter irony. I would be effectively neutralized by all sides. Alexander rose from his throne and walked to the windows overlooking the kingdom's capital. The streets below were filled with citizens going about their evening routines, unaware that their security and prosperity might soon be threatened by forces beyond their borders. "The information you've provided," he said without turning around. "Can you verify its accuracy? Do you have documents, correspondence, anything that would allow us to confirm these claims independently?" Isabella hesitated for the first time since the audience began. Some of the intelligence came through verbal communications, meetings that left no written records, but I do have documentation of financial transfers that support the claims about the coalition's military preparations. "Financial transfers that passed through accounts you controlled?" William asked pointedly. "Among others, yes." Isabella's admission hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall.
"But the transactions I'm referring to involved funds moving from the northern kingdoms to Asterian military suppliers, not money that I diverted for personal use." Captain Morris cleared his throat diplomatically.
"Your Majesty, if I may suggest, we could verify some of this information through our own intelligence networks. Our agents in the border regions should be able to confirm any unusual military activity or coalition building." Alexander turned back to face the room. "How long would that take?" 2 to 3 days for preliminary reports, perhaps a week for comprehensive intelligence," Captain Morris replied. "We may not have a week," Isabella interjected. "If King Marcus suspects that his intelligence network has been compromised, he might accelerate his timeline." William moved to stand beside his father, presenting a united front against Isabella's arguments. "Or you might be fabricating this entire threat to avoid the consequences of your actions." "To what end?" Isabella asked, spreading her hands in a gesture of apparent helplessness. "If I remain in the kingdom under the arrangement I've proposed, I lose everything I've worked to achieve. My power, my influence, my financial resources, all of it would be stripped away. I would gain nothing except the continued ability to breathe air within Valdoria's borders, which might be preferable to exile, especially if you've made enemies among your former partners who might not appreciate your change in circumstances," William observed. Isabella's composure cracked slightly, and for a brief moment, genuine fear flickered across her features. "That's a valid concern." The admission revealed more than Isabella probably intended. It confirmed that her activities had indeed created dangerous enemies, and that her situation was more desperate than she had initially let on. But it also suggested that the threats she described might be real, regardless of her motives for revealing them. Alexander returned to his throne, the weight of leadership evident in every movement. "I need time to consider your proposal and verify your claims about the external threats." "How much time?" Isabella asked. "You have until tomorrow morning, as originally stated. If our preliminary intelligence confirms your claims about coalition military activity, we'll discuss alternative arrangements." Alexander's voice carried the finality of royal decree. "If our investigation finds no evidence to support your allegations, you will depart as planned, and we will assume that this entire conversation was an elaborate attempt at manipulation." Isabella bowed formally, accepting the king's decision with as much grace as she could muster under the circumstances. "I understand, Your Majesty." As she turned to leave, William spoke again. "Isabella." She paused and looked back at him. "If you are telling the truth about the external threats, and if we do find an arrangement that allows you to remain in the kingdom, understand that you will be under constant surveillance. Any attempt to rebuild your network, any suspicious communication, any action that suggests you're working against Valdoria's interests will result in immediate imprisonment and trial for treason." "I understand completely, Your Highness," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the dire nature of the warning. After Isabella departed with her guards, the 3 men remained in the audience chamber as darkness began to fall outside the stained glass windows. The weight of the decisions they faced seemed to press down on them like a physical force. "What do you think?" Alexander asked his son. "I think she's telling the truth about the external threats, but I also think she's manipulating the situation to her advantage." William's response was measured and careful. "The question is whether we can afford to ignore the intelligence she's provided, regardless of her motives." Captain Morris nodded in agreement. I recommend immediate deployment of our reconnaissance teams to the border regions and activation of our intelligence networks throughout the region. If there is coalition military activity, we need to know about it as quickly as possible. And if we confirm the threats, Alexander asked, then we prepare for war while deciding how to handle Isabella's proposal. William replied grimly, because whether she remains in the kingdom or not, we're going to need every advantage we can get if we're facing a coordinated attack from multiple enemies. The three men began planning their next moves as night settled over the palace of Valdoria, each understanding that the morning might bring either war or peace, depending on what their investigations revealed about the truth behind Isabella's desperate revelations. Dawn brought with it confirmation of Isabella's worst predictions. Captain Morris burst into the war room, where King Alexander and Prince William had spent most of the night reviewing military strategies and diplomatic options. His face was grim, and the reports clutched in his hands trembled slightly from his urgent ride back to the palace. Your Majesty, our scouts have confirmed significant military buildups along the northern and eastern borders, Captain Morris announced, still catching his breath. 3 separate armies, at least 15,000 troops combined, positioned within striking distance of our major cities. Timeline? Based on their current positions and supply trains, they could begin coordinated attacks within 48 hours, Captain Morris replied. Our intelligence suggests they're waiting for some kind of signal or final confirmation before moving forward. King Alexander set down the diplomatic correspondence he had been reviewing. What about King Marcus? Any direct evidence of his involvement? Our agents in Storie report unusual activity in the royal palace, frequent meetings with foreign ambassadors, and large financial transfers to military suppliers. Captain Morris pulled out a leather folder containing additional documents. We also intercepted communications between Asturian commanders and Northern Kingdom generals discussing coordination strategies. The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Everything Isabella had warned them about was proving accurate, which meant they now faced the dual challenge of defending their kingdom while managing the political crisis her presence had created. Have there been any public announcements about Isabella's situation? William asked. Not yet, but rumors are already spreading through the capital. Palace staff, visiting dignitaries, even some of the nobility have noticed the increased security measures and Isabella's confinement to her chambers. Captain Morris consulted his notes. We estimate that word will reach our enemies within the next day or two, whether we make official announcements or not. Alexander stood and walked to the large window overlooking the palace courtyard. Below, he could see increased military activity as soldiers prepared for potential combat. The sight of his kingdom preparing for war filled him with a familiar mixture of determination and dread. Bring Isabella here immediately, he commanded. If we're going to face this threat, we need to understand everything she knows about the enemy's plans and capabilities. While Captain Morris departed to retrieve Isabella, Alexander and William continued their strategic planning. The military map spread across the room's central table showed clearly how vulnerable Valdoria's position had become. With enemies approaching from multiple directions, traditional defensive strategies would be insufficient. We need allies, William observed, studying the deployment patterns of the approaching armies. If we try to fight this alone, we'll be overwhelmed regardless of how well we prepare. Most of our traditional allies are either too distant to provide meaningful support or have already been neutralized by diplomatic pressure from the coalition. Alexander replied. Isabella's network might have included some of our most reliable partners in regional politics. When Isabella entered the war room 15 minutes later, she was no longer dressed in royal finery. Instead, she wore a simple brown dress more appropriate for a commoner than a former queen. But her bearing remained regal, and her eyes immediately went to the military maps that covered every available surface. You've confirmed the troop movements, she said without preamble. We have, Alexander confirmed. Now we need to know everything you can tell us about their strategy, timeline, and objectives. Isabella moved to the central table and began examining the maps. The northern kingdoms want the mining regions in our eastern provinces. King Marcus is primarily interested in our southern ports and agricultural lands. The coordination between them is based on dividing Valdoria's territory rather than any shared political ideology. William pointed to several marked positions on the map. What about their military capabilities? Troop quality, equipment, siege capabilities. The northern kingdoms have excellent heavy cavalry, but limited siege equipment. They're planning to overwhelm our border fortresses through rapid assault rather than prolonged siege warfare. Isabella traced movement patterns on the map with her finger. King Marcus has superior siege capabilities but weaker infantry. His strategy depends on the northern kingdoms drawing our main forces away from the fortified cities. You seem remarkably well informed about their military planning, Alexander observed suspiciously. Lord Blackwood was deeply involved in the coordination efforts. His communications with both coalition leaders included detailed discussions of strategy and resource allocation. Isabella's voice carried a note of bitter irony. He believed he could trust me with sensitive information because he thought I was completely under his influence. Captain Morris, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. What about their communication networks? If we could disrupt their coordination, they're using a combination of traditional messengers and coded correspondence through merchant networks. But the primary coordination is being handled through a meeting that's supposed to take place tomorrow night at the ruins of Blackstone Castle, about 50 miles north of here. Isabella paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. The meeting is being organized by someone calling himself the Architect, who appears to be the mastermind behind the entire coalition. This was the first mention of any mysterious coordinator, and all three men focused intently on Isabella's revelation. Who is the Architect? William asked. I don't know. Lord Blackwood never revealed his identity, and all communications from this person came through intermediaries. Isabella moved to another section of the map, but based on the level of detailed knowledge he possesses about Valdoria's defenses, economic resources, and political vulnerabilities, it has to be someone with intimate access to our kingdom's most sensitive information. They weren't just facing external enemies. They were dealing with a highly placed traitor within their own government, who had been systematically gathering intelligence for the coalition. How long has this architect been providing information? Alexander asked. Based on the timeline of coalition planning, at least 2 years, possibly longer. Isabella's voice grew quieter as she realized the full scope of what she was revealing. The level of detail in their strategic planning suggests access to military reports, economic data, diplomatic correspondence, even details about our royal family's personal relationships and vulnerabilities. William's face darkened as he processed this information. Someone in our inner circle has been feeding intelligence to our enemies for years. Not just someone, Alexander corrected grimly. Someone with access to information that's only available to a handful of the most trusted advisors and family members. The war room fell silent as each man considered the horrifying possibility that one of their most trusted associates had been working against them. The circle of people with access to the type of information Isabella described was extremely small, making the betrayal even more personal and dangerous. We need to identify this traitor before tomorrow night's meeting, William declared. If the Architect provides the coalition with real-time intelligence about our defensive preparations, our strategic planning will be compromised before we can implement it, Captain Morris finished. Isabella cleared her throat diplomatically. There might be a way to identify the traitor and disrupt the coalition's coordination at the same time. All eyes turned to her, and she seemed to steel herself before continuing. If I were to attend tomorrow night's meeting as Lord Blackwood's representative, I might be able to identify the Architect and gather intelligence about their final attack plans. Isabella's proposal hung in the air like a dangerous gamble. Lord Blackwood trusted me with enough authority that the other coalition members would accept my presence without suspicion. Absolutely not, William said immediately. It's too dangerous, and we have no guarantee that you wouldn't use the opportunity to warn them about our preparations. What guarantee do I need to provide? Isabella asked. My life would depend on the success of this mission. If the coalition conquers Valdoria, I'm a dead woman regardless of any previous arrangements I might have had with them. Alexander studied Isabella's expression carefully. Why would you take such a risk? Because this is still my home regardless of everything that's happened, Isabella replied quietly. I may have betrayed your trust and damaged this kingdom through my actions, but I'm not willing to see it destroyed by foreign invaders. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, but it raised new questions about her motivations and loyalties. Was this genuine patriotism, or simply another calculated move in a complex game of survival? Even if we agreed to this plan, Captain Morris pointed out, how would you communicate what you discover? The meeting location is too far from the palace for quick messenger service. Signal fires, Isabella suggested. 3 fires in sequence from the old watchtower near Blackstone Castle could be seen from our border fortifications. Different patterns could indicate different types of intelligence, enemy troop movements, identity of the traitor, changes in attack timeline. Artivaskers signaled by minds craving the presence of genuine sadness. It could work, but it would require perfect timing and enormous trust in someone who has already proven herself capable of elaborate deception. The alternative is waiting for the attack while knowing that our enemy possesses detailed knowledge of our every move, Isabella pointed out. At least this way we have a chance of leveling the intelligence playing field. Alexander walked to the window again, watching as morning sunlight illuminated the peaceful kingdom that might soon become a battlefield. The decision he made in the next few moments could determine whether Valdoria survived as an independent nation or fell to the coalition of enemies that surrounded them. If we agree to this plan, he said without turning around, and if you betray us again, there will be no third chances, no negotiations, no appeals, no mercy. I understand, Isabella replied. And if you succeed in identifying the traitor and gathering the intelligence we need, it doesn't absolve you of your previous crimes. You'll still face justice for your actions, but it will be the justice of a free kingdom rather than the vengeance of conquered territory. Isabella nodded, accepting the terms without argument. For perhaps the first time since her arrival at the palace 15 years earlier, she was acting without calculation or manipulation. Driven instead by a combination of desperation and genuine loyalty to the kingdom she had called home. Then God help us all, Alexander murmured, because we're about to gamble the fate of Valdoria on the word of someone who has already proven she's willing to lie, steal, and deceive to achieve her goals. But even as he spoke the words, Alexander knew they had little choice. With enemies approaching from multiple directions and a traitor providing them with detailed intelligence, conventional defensive strategies would likely fail. Their only hope lay in turning the enemy's intelligence network against itself, and Isabella might be their only means of accomplishing that desperate goal. The ancient watchtower at Blackstone Castle stood silhouetted against the evening sky as Isabella approached the ruins on horseback. She had spent the entire day preparing for this mission, studying maps, reviewing signal codes, and steeling herself for what could be her final act as a member of the Valdorian royal family. The weight of the kingdom's fate pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. 3 miles away, hidden in a grove of oak trees, Prince William commanded a small force of elite soldiers positioned to respond to Isabella's signals. They had ridden hard to reach the observation point before nightfall, and now they waited in tense silence for any indication of what was transpiring at the secret meeting. King Alexander remained at the palace, coordinating the kingdom's broader defensive preparations while monitoring communications from multiple intelligence sources. The past 24 hours had brought confirmation of even more dire threats than originally anticipated, with reports of additional coalition forces moving toward Valdoria's borders. At Blackstone Castle, Isabella dismounted and approached the ruins where torches had been lit to mark the meeting location. The crumbling walls that had once protected a proud fortress now provided cover for enemies planning the destruction of everything she had once called her own. Lord Blackwood emerged from the shadows as Isabella tethered her horse to a fallen stone pillar. His expression was cautious but welcoming, though she noticed he kept his hand near his sword hilt, a precaution that suggested the coalition partners didn't entirely trust each other. "Isabella, I wasn't certain you would come," Blackwood said, studying her simple traveling clothes with apparent approval. "The rumors from the palace suggested that your position had become complicated. King Alexander discovered some irregularities in our trade arrangements," Isabella replied, using the code phrases they had established months earlier. "I convinced him that a temporary withdrawal from court would be appropriate while we resolved the administrative issues." Blackwood relaxed slightly, apparently accepting her explanation. "Your presence here tonight will be crucial for finalizing our coordination with the architect." Isabella felt her heart rate increase at the mention of the mysterious coordinator, but she maintained her composed expression. "I'm looking forward to finally meeting this remarkable strategist. Lord Blackwood, you've spoken so highly of his planning capabilities, and you will not be disappointed," came a voice from deeper within the ruins. Isabella turned toward the sound and felt her blood freeze as a familiar figure stepped into the torchlight. The architect was no mysterious foreign agent or unknown enemy spy. Instead, she found herself staring at Duke Harrison of the Northern Provinces, one of King Alexander's most trusted advisors and oldest friends. Duke Harrison had served the royal family for over 30 years. He had been present at Alexander's coronation, had helped negotiate the kingdom's most important treaties, and had access to virtually every aspect of Valdoria's governmental, military, and economic operations. His betrayal represented not just a security breach but a personal devastation that would shake Alexander to his core. "Your Grace," Isabella managed to say, though her voice betrayed her shock despite her best efforts to remain composed. "Surprised, my dear Isabella?" Duke Harrison's smile was cold and calculating. "I suppose you believed yourself to be the only one capable of building networks and pursuing long-term strategies independent of Alexander's naive idealism." Lord Blackwood looked between them with obvious confusion. "You two know each other?" "Oh yes, we know each other quite well. Lady Isabella has been an unwitting participant in my intelligence gathering for several years now. Her various activities provided excellent cover for my own operations." The full scope of Isabella's manipulation became clear to her in that moment. She had believed herself to be orchestrating complex political and financial schemes, when in reality she had been nothing more than a convenient distraction that allowed Duke Harrison to conduct his treasonous activities without suspicion. Every meeting she had attended, every document she had signed, every alliance she had formed had been observed and recorded by someone with far greater access to sensitive information than she possessed. "The marriage irregularities," Isabella said, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "You're the one who provided King Alexander with that information." "Of course I did. Your usefulness as an unwitting agent was coming to an end, and I needed Alexander to be distracted by internal political crisis when our coalition began its final preparations." Duke Harrison moved closer to the torchlight, revealing a face that Isabella now realized had been wearing a mask of loyalty for decades. "Your dramatic expulsion from court has provided the perfect cover for tonight's final coordination meeting." Isabella's mind raced as she processed the implications of what she had discovered. Duke Harrison wasn't just a traitor providing intelligence to enemies, he was the mastermind behind the entire conspiracy. His position within Alexander's inner circle meant he had shaped royal policy for years, steering the kingdom toward vulnerabilities that could be exploited by the coalition he had helped organize. "What are your final instructions for tomorrow's attack?" Lord Blackwood asked Duke Harrison, apparently eager to proceed with their military planning. "The assault will begin at dawn with coordinated strikes on 3 fronts," Duke Harrison replied, spreading a detailed map across a fallen section of castle wall. "King Marcus will attack from the south with siege equipment, targeting the port cities where our defenses are weakest. The northern kingdoms will strike from the east with cavalry, overwhelming our border fortifications before our main army can respond." "And the third front?" Isabella asked, though she dreaded the answer. "I will open the palace gates from within and capture Alexander before he can coordinate any effective resistance," Duke Harrison said matter-of-factly. "With the king eliminated and the royal family neutralized, the kingdom's military leadership will collapse into chaos." Isabella felt physically sick as she realized the true scope of the betrayal. Not only was Duke Harrison planning to deliver Valdoria to its enemies, but he intended to personally murder the man who had trusted him above all others for 3 decades. "What about Prince William?" Lord Blackwood inquired. "Our intelligence suggests he's been given military command. William is currently positioned near our northern borders, responding to false intelligence reports I provided about coalition troop movements." Duke Harrison replied with evident satisfaction. "By the time he realizes the deception and returns to the palace, the capital will be secured and his father will be dead." The casual way Duke Harrison discussed murdering Alexander and manipulating William filled Isabella with a rage she had never experienced before. Despite all her own crimes and deceptions, she had never contemplated violence against the royal family. Her schemes had been motivated by greed and ambition, not genuine hatred or desire for destruction. As the two men continued their detailed planning, Isabella carefully moved toward the watchtower where she was supposed to send signals to Prince William's forces. But Duke Harrison's revelation about William being positioned at the northern borders based on false intelligence meant her signals would be seen by no one. "Before we conclude tonight's meeting," Duke Harrison said, turning his attention back to Isabella, "there's one more detail we need to address." Isabella felt a chill of premonition as she saw the change in Duke Harrison's expression. "What detail?" "Your knowledge of our complete operation makes you a significant security risk," he replied calmly. "I'm afraid your usefulness to our cause has come to an end." Lord Blackwood stepped aside as Duke Harrison drew his sword, the torchlight reflecting off the polished steel in menacing patterns. Isabella realized with horrible clarity that she had walked into a trap designed not just to eliminate her as a witness, but to ensure that no one could warn Alexander about the true scope of the betrayal he faced. "You never intended for me to leave here alive," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Your death will be attributed to brigands or wild animals." "Another victim of the dangerous times that have befallen our troubled kingdom," Duke Harrison replied. "Alexander will mourn your passing, never knowing that your final act was attendance at a meeting planning his own murder." Isabella backed toward the watchtower stairs, her mind working desperately to find some means of escape or communication. The signal fires had been prepared in advance, and if she could reach them before Duke Harrison could stop her, she might still be able to warn the kingdom of the impending attack. "I wouldn't advise attempting to use those signal fires," Duke Harrison said, apparently reading her thoughts. "I've had them modified to produce colored smoke that will signal our allies to begin their attacks immediately. Any attempt to light them will merely accelerate the kingdom's destruction." The trap was complete and perfect. Isabella's mission had been doomed from the moment she agreed to it, because Duke Harrison had anticipated every possible action she might take. Her death would ensure silence, while her presence at the meeting provided him with the perfect alibi for being away from the palace when the attacks began. But as Duke Harrison raised his sword to strike the killing blow, Isabella heard the sound of approaching horses. Multiple riders were converging on the castle ruins from several directions, their torches creating dancing points of light in the darkness. "What is that?" Lord Blackwood asked, moving to a gap in the castle wall to peer into the night. Duke Harrison's confident expression faltered for the first time since revealing his identity. "It appears we have unexpected visitors." The riders emerged into the torchlight, and Isabella's heart leaped as she recognized Prince William leading a force of royal guards. Behind them rode King Alexander himself, along with Captain Morris and enough soldiers to surround the entire castle ruins. "How did they find us?" Lord Blackwood demanded, drawing his own sword as the approaching riders took positions around the perimeter of the ruins. Isabella smiled grimly as she realized what had happened. Because someone who truly served the kingdom provided them with accurate intelligence about this meeting. Duke Harrison's face went pale as the implications became clear. "You sent word to them before coming here." "No," Isabella replied, backing further up the watchtower stairs as the royal forces closed in. "But someone did. Someone who has been watching your activities and waiting for the right moment to expose your treason." The sound of armored boots echoed through the ruins as royal guards poured through gaps in the ancient walls. Duke Harrison and Lord Blackwood found themselves surrounded, their carefully planned meeting transformed into a trap that would expose the entire conspiracy. King Alexander emerged from behind a crumbling wall, his face a mask of controlled fury as he confronted the man who had betrayed 30 years of friendship and trust. "Hello, Harrison. I think we need to have a conversation about your recent activities." As dawn broke over the kingdom of Valdoria, the crisis that had threatened to destroy the realm was finally resolved. The coalition armies, deprived of their internal intelligence source and coordination, found themselves facing a fully prepared defensive force that had been warned of their precise attack plans. Duke Harrison's network was systematically dismantled, and the traitor himself faced justice for his crimes against the crown. Isabella's role in exposing the conspiracy earned her a conditional pardon, though she chose to accept exile rather than remain in a kingdom where her presence would always carry the shadow of her past deceptions. As she departed Valdoria for the final time, she carried with her the knowledge that her final act had been one of genuine service to the realm she had once called home. King Alexander and Prince William stood on the palace ramparts, watching the sunrise illuminate a kingdom that had come dangerously close to falling to its enemies. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also revealed the true strength of Valdoria's people and institutions when faced with genuine threats to their freedom and security. "Do you think we'll ever be able to trust completely again?" William asked his father. Alexander was quiet for several moments before responding. "Perhaps the lesson isn't about trust, but about vigilance. A kingdom that remains strong is one that never forgets that freedom requires constant protection, even from those who seem most worthy of our confidence." The sun climbed higher over Valdoria, illuminating a realm that had survived its greatest test through a combination of courage, wisdom, and the unexpected redemption of someone who had learned, perhaps too late, the true value of the home she had nearly helped destroy.